The most dangerous promise is the one your heart makes before your mind has the chance to refuse. Night had already swallowed the last traces of sunset when Olivia Carter stood alone beneath the towering gates of the royal palace. The cold autumn wind tugged gently at the sleeves of her simple cream-colored dress as dozens of silent guards watched her every movement without a single word. She was only an Omega, a forgotten young woman whose quiet scent had never drawn admiration inside her own pack. Most believed she possessed nothing remarkable except a gentle heart that the world had mistaken for weakness. Yet somehow, she had been summoned to the residence of the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. Rumors traveled faster than horses, and by the time Olivia crossed the enormous stone courtyard, whispers already echoed through every corridor. Some servants lowered their eyes in sympathy. Others looked at her with quiet curiosity. No Omega had ever been invited to spend the night inside the private chambers of the Alpha King. Some claimed it was a strange royal tradition. Others insisted it was a mysterious test no one truly understood. No one offered an explanation. No one offered comfort. At the end of a grand hallway lined with marble columns, two enormous wooden doors slowly opened. Warm firelight spilled into the corridor as Olivia stepped inside. The chamber was far simpler than she expected. Tall bookshelves covered one wall. A fireplace filled the room with gentle warmth. Large windows overlooked endless moonlit forests stretching beyond the palace. Standing beside the window was Alpha King Nathaniel Hayes. His dark hair reflected the golden firelight, while calm blue eyes quietly studied the young woman who had just entered. He looked neither cruel nor welcoming. Instead, there was an unusual sadness hidden beneath the dignity that surrounded him. Olivia lowered her head respectfully. "Your Majesty." Nathaniel remained silent for several long moments before finally speaking in a calm voice that carried through the quiet room. "Survive one night beside me, Omega, and you are free." Olivia slowly raised her eyes, uncertain she had heard correctly. Nathaniel continued before she could ask a single question. "When the sun rises tomorrow morning, you may leave this palace with enough gold to begin any life you choose. No one will ever stop you." Confusion replaced fear. She had expected impossible demands, political bargains, perhaps even exile. Instead, she was offered freedom in exchange for nothing more than staying until dawn. "Why me?" she asked softly. Nathaniel looked toward the moon beyond the window before answering. "Because I need the truth." His words only deepened the mystery. Olivia searched his expression for signs of deception, but found only exhaustion carried by someone who had spent years bearing responsibilities too heavy to share. She nodded quietly. "Then I will stay." Nathaniel motioned toward a comfortable chair near the fireplace. "You may rest wherever you wish. No one will disturb you." Hours passed in almost complete silence. Crackling firewood became the only sound between them. Olivia noticed several old documents scattered across the table, untouched tea growing cold, and faint shadows beneath the Alpha King's eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights. He did not look like a ruler preparing to test an Omega. He looked like a man waiting for an answer he feared might finally arrive before morning. Outside, the palace settled into peaceful darkness. Inside, neither of them realized that before the first light of dawn reached the kingdom, one ancient instinct would awaken, and nothing either of them believed about freedom would ever remain the same. The great palace clock quietly marked another passing hour, yet neither Olivia Carter nor Alpha King Nathaniel Hayes had spoken since their brief conversation beside the fireplace. Moonlight stretched across the polished stone floor, blending softly with the warm glow of burning logs, creating a peaceful silence that somehow felt heavier than any argument. Olivia remained seated near the fire exactly where Nathaniel had invited her to rest, her hands folded neatly in her lap, while her curious blue eyes occasionally wandered toward the man standing near the window. Every servant had expected fear to fill the room before midnight. Instead, an unexpected calm slowly settled between two strangers who shared neither history nor trust. Nathaniel had spent years mastering every instinct that came with being the Alpha King. Self-control had become part of his identity. Yet tonight something invisible refused to obey. Every time Olivia shifted slightly in her chair or quietly crossed the room to look at the bookshelves, an unfamiliar restlessness stirred deep inside him. It was not anger. It was not suspicion. It was simply the overwhelming awareness that she had moved farther away. Nathaniel frowned almost imperceptibly, confused by a feeling he had never experienced before. Olivia noticed the change, but misunderstood its meaning. Believing she might be disturbing him, she immediately stepped back toward the fireplace. "I am sorry, Your Majesty," she said softly. "I only wish to see the books." Nathaniel looked at her with genuine surprise. "You have nothing to apologize for." She offered a small smile before carefully selecting a single worn history book from the shelf. As she opened the first page, she discovered handwritten notes filling the margins with observations about leadership, compassion, and responsibility. They were thoughtful rather than proud. She looked toward Nathaniel with quiet curiosity. "You wrote these?" Nathaniel nodded once. "Long ago." Olivia gently closed the book. "The people outside believe you are feared because you are powerful." Nathaniel answered without looking away from the moonlit forest beyond the window. "Fear keeps order for a little while. Respect lasts much longer." His words lingered in the room. Olivia had never expected the kingdom's strongest alpha to speak with such quiet honesty. Minutes later, she noticed an untouched teapot resting near the fireplace. Without asking permission, she carefully poured 2 cups before placing one upon the table closest to Nathaniel. "It is probably cold," she admitted with an embarrassed smile, "but it seemed lonely sitting there." Nathaniel stared at the simple gesture for several silent seconds before accepting the cup. No one had ever described a forgotten cup of tea as lonely. The thought was strangely comforting. As midnight approached, the peaceful atmosphere changed almost too subtly to notice. Nathaniel suddenly became unusually alert. His shoulders stiffened. His breathing slowed. Somewhere beneath his calm expression, his alpha instincts had awakened without warning. Olivia quietly stood and walked toward the nearest window to admire the stars scattered across the clear autumn sky. The moment she took several steps away, Nathaniel instinctively turned toward her. He did not even realize he had moved until he found himself standing only a few feet behind her. Olivia looked back with gentle confusion. "Is something wrong?" Nathaniel searched for an answer, but found none. "No," he replied honestly. "I simply felt that you should not be standing alone." The explanation made little sense, even to him. Olivia smiled kindly, believing he was merely fulfilling his duty as her host. She thanked him before returning toward the fireplace once more. Relief settled over Nathaniel almost immediately, and that frightened him far more than anything else that had happened that night. Somewhere deep within the silence, the ancient wolf sleeping inside the Alpha King had already made a choice that the man himself was not yet prepared to understand. The palace remained wrapped in silence as the night slowly drifted toward its darkest hour. Beyond the towering windows, countless stars shimmered above the endless forest, while inside the royal chamber the fire had burned lower, leaving gentle amber light dancing across the stone walls. Olivia Carter quietly returned the history book to its place upon the shelf before noticing Nathaniel Hayes standing motionless beside the fireplace. His calm expression had not changed, yet something about him felt different. His shoulders remained relaxed, but his attention followed her with quiet persistence, as though an invisible thread now connected every step she took to every breath he drew. Olivia pretended not to notice, believing the strange tension belonged only to the responsibilities of a king. She glanced toward the tea service resting upon the table. The cup Nathaniel had accepted earlier was now empty. A faint smile appeared on her face. She carefully gathered the teapot and discovered a small kitchen connected to the royal chamber. Inside, fresh herbs rested in neatly arranged wooden baskets beside a kettle waiting above warm coals. Without disturbing anyone, she prepared a fresh pot of herbal tea the same way her late grandmother had taught her many years before. The familiar scent of mint and wild honey slowly filled the quiet room. Nathaniel noticed it immediately. He turned and watched Olivia return carrying the tray with careful hands. "I hope you do not mind," she said gently. The first tea had grown cold. Nathaniel accepted the warm cup without hesitation. After one sip, he paused in genuine surprise. "It has been many years since anyone prepared tea for me." Olivia lowered her eyes with quiet humility. "Sometimes people remember the king and forget the man." Her words settled softly into the silence. Nathaniel stared into the rising steam without speaking. Countless servants obeyed his commands every day, yet none had ever spoken to him with such simple honesty. There had been no attempt to impress him, no hidden request, no fear disguised as respect. Only kindness freely offered. As another hour passed, Olivia noticed Nathaniel quietly rubbing his left wrist. The movement was subtle, almost invisible, but years of caring for elderly neighbors had taught her to recognize discomfort long before it became obvious. "Does it still hurt when the weather changes?" she asked carefully. Nathaniel looked up in surprise. "How did you know?" Olivia smiled softly. "You have been touching the same place ever since I arrived." Nathaniel slowly rolled back the edge of his sleeve, revealing a faded scar crossing his wrist. "An old injury," he explained. "It healed long ago." Olivia examined the scar from a respectful distance before quietly searching a nearby cabinet where she found a small jar of herbal balm prepared by the royal physicians. "May I?" she asked. Nathaniel hesitated only briefly before extending his hand. Olivia gently applied a thin layer of the fragrant balm with careful movements, treating the scar without haste or nervousness. She never looked at him as though he were the Alpha King. She looked only at someone carrying an old wound that still deserved kindness. Nathaniel felt an unfamiliar calm settle deep inside his heart. The constant restlessness that had troubled him throughout the evening suddenly disappeared beneath the warmth of her gentle touch. It lasted only a few quiet moments before Olivia respectfully stepped back. Almost immediately, the strange emptiness returned. Nathaniel looked toward her with growing confusion. The closer she stood, the more peaceful everything became. The farther she moved away, the stronger the invisible ache inside him grew. He had faced impossible decisions, political betrayals, and years of lonely responsibility without hesitation, yet nothing had ever unsettled him like the quiet presence of one gentle Omega who had entered his life only hours before. And somewhere beneath that growing uncertainty, the ancient wolf within him had already stopped thinking of the approaching sunrise as the moment she would finally leave. The first pale hint of dawn had not yet appeared beyond the eastern mountains, yet the quiet rhythm inside the royal chamber had already begun to change. Olivia Carter believed only a few hours remained before the unusual agreement reached its peaceful conclusion. She folded the soft blanket she had borrowed beside the fireplace and carefully placed it upon the chair, wanting to leave everything exactly as she had found it. Alpha King Nathaniel Hayes watched every small movement without fully understanding why each one filled him with growing unease. He had promised that when morning arrived, she would walk away with complete freedom. It had seemed like the simplest promise in the world only hours before. Now it felt strangely impossible. Olivia noticed the fire had almost disappeared beneath fading embers. Without saying a word, she knelt beside the hearth and gently arranged several fresh pieces of wood before adding a single spark from the remaining flame. Warm light slowly returned to the room. Nathaniel quietly observed her thoughtful habit of caring for things that did not belong to her. She treated the royal chamber with the same respect she would have shown inside her own humble home. Nothing she did seemed calculated. Every action came naturally from the quiet kindness that shaped her character. "You always notice what other people forget," Nathaniel said softly. Olivia looked toward him with mild surprise before smiling. "My grandmother used to tell me that small things become important when everyone assumes someone else will take care of them." Nathaniel lowered his eyes thoughtfully. Few people had ever spoken to him about ordinary life. Most conversations inside the palace revolved around alliances, trade, territory, or ceremony. Listening to Olivia somehow made the enormous palace feel less empty. As the silence returned, Olivia slowly walked toward the large window overlooking the palace gardens. Far beyond the stone walls, the first faint silver line of approaching sunrise rested upon the distant horizon. She quietly exhaled. "Morning will arrive soon," she whispered. Nathaniel felt an unexpected heaviness settle inside his chest. He reminded himself of the agreement he had made. When daylight came, she would leave. That had always been the purpose of inviting her here. Yet the thought now felt completely different from the certainty he had carried the evening before. Olivia turned back toward him with gentle gratitude. "Thank you for keeping your promise, Your Majesty. I never imagined I would leave here with enough to begin again." Nathaniel wanted to answer immediately, but the words refused to come. Deep inside him, another voice rejected everything his mind insisted was right. He slowly walked toward the center of the room, while Olivia moved to collect the small travel bag she had brought from her village. The moment she reached for it, Nathaniel instinctively stepped forward before realizing what he had done. Olivia paused, looking at him with quiet confusion rather than fear. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Nathaniel remained silent for several long moments. His heart urged him to tell her not to leave, while his honor demanded that he respect the promise he had freely given. Never before had those two parts of himself stood in direct opposition. He finally forced a calm smile. "Nothing is wrong," he answered gently, although neither of them truly believed it. Outside the chamber, the palace slowly awakened as servants prepared for another ordinary day. Inside, nothing felt ordinary any longer. Nathaniel understood kingdoms, laws, and responsibility, but he could not explain why every instinct within him resisted the simple idea of watching Olivia walk beyond those doors. And as the first golden rays of sunrise slowly reached the palace windows, the Alpha King realized that surviving one night had been far easier than keeping the promise he had made before that night ever began. Morning sunlight slowly filled the royal chamber, washing away the last traces of the long autumn night. Olivia Carter adjusted the strap of her small travel bag and looked toward the open doors leading into the quiet palace corridor. She believed her journey inside the royal residence had reached its peaceful ending. The unusual agreement had been fulfilled. She had survived the night exactly as Alpha King Nathaniel Hayes had promised, and now she intended to leave with gratitude and begin a new life somewhere beyond the reach of old memories. Nathaniel stood only a few feet away, his expression calm enough that no ordinary observer would have noticed the conflict hidden behind his steady blue eyes. He had honored every promise throughout his reign, no matter how difficult. Breaking his word had never been an option. Yet every instinct within him resisted allowing Olivia to disappear beyond the palace gates. He silently reminded himself that a king must rule with discipline instead of emotion. Olivia offered him a respectful smile. "Thank you for your generosity, Your Majesty. I will never forget your kindness." Nathaniel reached toward a polished wooden chest resting beside his desk and lifted a small velvet pouch filled with gold coins. He placed it carefully into her hands. "This belongs to you," he said quietly. "It should be enough to purchase a home, farmland, or whatever future you decide to build." Olivia accepted the gift with both hands and bowed her head. "You have already given me far more than I expected." She turned toward the doorway, taking only a few gentle steps before something unusual happened. Nathaniel felt a sudden wave of unease unlike anything he had experienced before. It was not fear for her safety. It was a deep, overwhelming certainty that she was moving somewhere she did not belong. Without thinking, he called her name. "Olivia." She stopped immediately and turned back with gentle curiosity. "Yes, Your Majesty." Nathaniel opened his mouth, yet no explanation came. Countless reasons crossed his mind, but none were honest enough to speak aloud. Finally, he said, "There is something I must understand before you leave." Olivia quietly returned, her expression patient rather than suspicious. "What is it?" Nathaniel hesitated before answering. "When you were near me last night, everything became quieter." He frowned slightly, searching for better words. "The constant restlessness I have carried for years simply disappeared." Olivia lowered her eyes thoughtfully. "Perhaps you finally allowed yourself to rest." Nathaniel almost smiled. "Perhaps." Before either of them could continue, a gentle knock echoed through the chamber doors. Nathaniel's longtime royal physician entered with respectful formality. The elderly man paused the instant he noticed Olivia standing beside the Alpha King. His experienced eyes moved between them before resting upon Nathaniel with visible surprise. "Your Majesty," the physician said carefully, "you appear remarkably well this morning." Nathaniel looked confused. "Is that unusual?" The physician nodded slowly. "For many years, your pulse has always remained unsettled after sleepless nights. Today it is perfectly calm." His thoughtful gaze shifted toward Olivia. "Did anything unusual happen during the evening?" Olivia politely shook her head. "We simply talked, shared tea, and waited for morning." The physician remained silent, though curiosity lingered in his expression. After he departed, Nathaniel walked toward the tall window overlooking the palace gardens where servants had already begun another ordinary day. Nothing outside had changed, yet everything inside him felt different. Olivia quietly approached the doorway once more, determined not to overstay the welcome she had been given. Nathaniel watched her fingers reach for the bronze door handle, and once again the invisible resistance returned with undeniable force. This time he finally understood one truth. The promise keeping Olivia free belonged to the king. The desperate voice begging her to stay belonged to the ancient wolf that no longer intended to let her walk away without first revealing why destiny had brought her into his life. Olivia Carter slowly lowered her hand from the bronze door handle, sensing that the silence behind her carried words the Alpha King had not yet spoken. She turned with quiet patience and found Nathaniel Hayes standing exactly where she had left him, his calm expression hiding a struggle that seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. Neither of them hurried to fill the silence. It was Nathaniel who finally spoke. "Would you allow me one more day?" Olivia blinked in surprise. "One more day?" Nathaniel nodded. "Not because I wish to break my promise. Because I believe something happened last night that neither of us understands." Olivia studied his face carefully. There was no command in his voice, only sincere uncertainty. She had expected the Alpha King to possess every answer, yet the man standing before her seemed just as puzzled as she was. After a thoughtful pause, she smiled gently. "If one more day helps you find the truth, then I will stay." Relief passed through Nathaniel so quickly that even he could not hide it. The strange pressure that had settled inside him eased almost instantly, leaving him wondering once again why her decision affected him so deeply. Before either of them could continue, another knock echoed through the chamber. The elderly royal physician returned, accompanied by the palace archivist, an older woman whose knowledge of the kingdom's oldest records was respected by every noble family. She carried a weathered leather book that looked centuries old. Nathaniel welcomed them inside. "Dr. Samuel believes something unusual occurred last night," the archivist explained. "He asked me to search the oldest royal records." She carefully opened the fragile volume upon the table. Faded ink covered every page, preserving stories that had nearly vanished with time. Olivia remained respectfully quiet while Nathaniel examined the ancient journal. The archivist slowly turned several pages before stopping at an illustration of a crowned wolf standing beside a young woman surrounded by blooming silver flowers. "According to these records," she said softly, "there have been rare moments throughout history when an Alpha King's wolf formed an immediate bond before the king himself understood what was happening." Nathaniel looked toward the drawing with growing concentration. "A mate bond?" The archivist gently shook her head. "Not exactly. The old writings describe it as the wolf recognizing a soul before the heart has caught up. It is said to happen only when destiny wishes to protect both people from making the wrong choice." Olivia quietly listened without speaking. She had never imagined such ancient legends could have anything to do with her ordinary life. The archivist continued reading. "The records also mention that forcing such a bond or denying it out of fear only creates confusion. Time, kindness, and truth are the only paths that reveal its purpose." Nathaniel slowly closed the book. Those words echoed everything he had experienced since Olivia entered the palace. He had never felt trapped by anger or desire. Instead, he had felt an overwhelming need to keep her safe, close, and at peace. Olivia finally spoke with her usual calm sincerity. "Perhaps the old records are simply reminding us not to rush toward conclusions." Nathaniel smiled for the first time that morning. "You always find the simplest answer." She returned the smile. Simple answers are usually the hardest ones to notice. As the archivist gathered the ancient journal, another palace servant quietly entered the chamber carrying a sealed invitation embossed with the royal crest. "Your Majesty," the servant announced respectfully, "the Council of Noble Houses has requested your presence this afternoon. They have also heard that an Omega remained inside the royal chamber throughout the night." Nathaniel accepted the invitation without opening it, but he already understood what awaited him. The palace had begun asking questions, and before the day ended, the entire kingdom would want answers that neither he nor Olivia had fully discovered for themselves. The afternoon sun cast long golden beams across the royal council chamber as the leaders of the noble houses gathered beneath banners that had represented the kingdom for generations. Olivia Carter remained quietly near the entrance at Nathaniel Hayes's request, dressed in the same simple cream-colored dress she had worn the night before. She stood with calm dignity despite feeling the weight of countless curious eyes upon her. Whispered conversations drifted through the grand hall before the meeting had even begun. Some nobles questioned why an ordinary Omega had been invited to remain inside the palace after sunrise. Others quietly wondered whether the ancient stories preserved inside the royal archives had begun to unfold once again. Nathaniel entered the chamber with his usual composed confidence. The conversations immediately faded into respectful silence. He took his place before the council table, yet instead of sitting upon the elevated throne reserved for the Alpha King, he remained standing at the same level as everyone else. "You requested this meeting," he said calmly. "Speak freely." An older nobleman stepped forward first. "Your Majesty, the palace has always honored tradition. The kingdom deserves to understand why an unknown Omega spent the night inside your private residence." Nathaniel answered without hesitation. "Because I invited her." Another council member exchanged uncertain glances with the others before speaking more carefully. "The concern is not the invitation itself. It is the growing belief that your wolf has recognized something unusual." The chamber grew noticeably quieter. Nathaniel did not deny the possibility. "My wolf has become unusually protective," he admitted. "The reason remains unclear." Murmurs spread across the room once again. Several nobles appeared uneasy, while others looked thoughtful rather than fearful. Olivia listened in silence, wishing she could somehow ease the tension without drawing further attention to herself. She stepped forward only after Nathaniel gave a nearly invisible nod. "Your Majesty has treated me with nothing except kindness and respect," she said gently. "If my presence has created confusion, I am willing to leave immediately so the kingdom will not be troubled because of me." Her quiet words surprised everyone. No demand for recognition. No attempt to benefit from the growing rumors. Only concern for others. The council members exchanged thoughtful looks. Nathaniel turned toward Olivia, and before he could answer, a strange feeling settled deep within him once again. The simple idea of watching her walk away caused the same quiet ache that had followed him since sunrise. His wolf responded before his mind could argue against it. Nathaniel took one calm step forward until he stood beside Olivia rather than apart from her. The movement was small, yet every person inside the chamber noticed it immediately. He had not reached for her hand or made any dramatic declaration. He had simply chosen to stand where his instincts told him she belonged. Dr. Samuel, watching from the back of the chamber, slowly lowered his eyes with quiet understanding. The old physician had seen enough to recognize what the Alpha King himself was only beginning to accept. One of the younger nobles finally broke the silence. "Your Majesty, your wolf has already chosen." Nathaniel remained still for several moments before answering with complete honesty. "Perhaps it has." He looked toward Olivia, whose blue eyes reflected equal parts surprise and compassion. She did not step closer, yet she did not move away either. Between them existed no certainty, no royal announcement, and no promise beyond the quiet trust they had built together since the previous evening. But throughout the great council chamber, everyone sensed that something far older than custom had begun to guide the future of the kingdom, and for the first time in many generations, the Alpha King's greatest act of strength was not commanding others to follow him, but allowing his heart to follow the truth his wolf had recognized first. The council chamber remained silent long after Nathaniel Hayes admitted that his wolf had made a choice before he fully understood it himself. No one rushed to speak. Even the nobles who had arrived prepared to challenge the Alpha King now found themselves watching Olivia Carter with new eyes. She stood with quiet grace, neither proud nor frightened, as though the unexpected attention belonged to someone else entirely. Nathaniel slowly turned toward the council. "No law has been broken," he said calmly. "No tradition has been ignored. An agreement was honored exactly as it was promised." Several council members nodded, unable to dispute his words. Then an elderly noblewoman rose from her seat. She had advised 3 generations of rulers and rarely spoke unless every sentence carried purpose. "Your Majesty," she said gently, "the kingdom is not troubled because an Omega entered your chamber. The kingdom is uncertain because your heart has not yet decided whether to follow the promise you made or the truth your wolf has revealed." Her words settled over the chamber with remarkable clarity. Nathaniel lowered his eyes for a brief moment. She was correct. He had fulfilled his promise by giving Olivia the freedom to leave. Yet every instinct told him that allowing her to disappear would become the greatest mistake of his life. Olivia quietly stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "a promise should never become a burden." Nathaniel met her gentle gaze. "What do you mean?" She smiled with the same quiet kindness that had changed the atmosphere of the palace from the moment she arrived. "You promised me freedom, not loneliness. If I remain only because you feel responsible, then neither of us will truly be free." Those simple words reached Nathaniel more deeply than any argument offered by the council. For the first time since their unusual meeting began, he understood the difference between holding someone close and inviting them to stay. He slowly walked toward Olivia until they stood only a few feet apart. Every noble watched without speaking. "Olivia," he said quietly, "when I asked you to survive one night beside me, I believed I was testing an old legend. Instead, I discovered something about myself." She listened without interrupting. "For many years I believed strength meant carrying every burden alone. Then you entered this palace and treated an exhausted king like an ordinary man who simply needed warm tea, honest conversation, and kindness without expectation. My wolf recognized that truth before I did." Olivia's blue eyes softened with emotion, yet she remained composed. "And what does your heart say now?" Nathaniel smiled with peaceful certainty. "It says that freedom also means choosing where you wish to belong." He reached into the pocket of his formal coat and carefully removed the small velvet pouch filled with gold that he had given her earlier that morning. "The promise still stands," he said. "This is yours, whether you stay or leave. Nothing about your future will ever be decided for you." Olivia accepted the pouch once more, her fingers gently closing around it. She looked toward the great palace doors standing open beneath the afternoon sunlight. Beyond them waited the wide world and every possibility she had dreamed about. Then she looked back at Nathaniel. There was no command in his eyes, no expectation, only hope. She quietly placed the pouch upon the council table. "Then I choose freely," she said with a gentle smile. "Not because destiny asks me to, not because your wolf wishes it. I choose to stay long enough to discover whether my own heart has been quietly walking beside yours all along." A peaceful warmth settled across the chamber. No ancient ceremony announced her decision. No dramatic celebration followed. Yet everyone present understood they had witnessed something far more meaningful than tradition. They had seen two people choose each other without fear, and that choice would soon reshape not only their lives, but the future of the kingdom itself. Several months passed, and the story of one quiet autumn night became part of the kingdom's living memory. The palace itself seemed different. Laughter returned to hallways that had once echoed only with formal footsteps. Servants noticed that the Alpha King no longer skipped his morning tea, and the royal physicians quietly celebrated the steady peace that had replaced years of restless nights. Nathaniel Hayes had not changed because someone had asked him to become a different ruler. He had changed because Olivia Carter reminded him that even the strongest leader deserved moments of ordinary happiness. Olivia never sought the attention that naturally followed her. She continued greeting every palace worker by name, helping gardeners gather fresh herbs, and spending afternoons reading with children whose parents served the royal household. The nobles who had once questioned her place slowly discovered that respect could not be inherited through blood alone. It could also be earned through patience, humility, and genuine compassion. One crisp spring morning, Nathaniel invited the council, the palace staff, and representatives from every pack to gather within the royal gardens where thousands of silver flowers had begun blooming beneath the warm sunshine. Dr. Samuel smiled quietly when he recognized the same flowers illustrated inside the ancient journal. The old legend had never promised power or glory. It had always promised truth. Nathaniel stepped forward before the assembled crowd. There was no heavy crown upon his head that day, only the calm confidence of a man who no longer feared listening to both his heart and his duty. He looked toward Olivia with the same peaceful smile that had gradually become familiar throughout the palace. "Many believed strength meant standing above others," he said. "I once believed that as well. Then someone entered my life and quietly taught me that the strongest foundation for any kingdom is kindness freely given." Olivia lowered her eyes with humble gratitude, but Nathaniel gently reached for her hand. This time she accepted without hesitation. I promised Olivia complete freedom, he continued. That promise remains unchanged today. She stands beside me because she chose this path herself, and every future decision we make will be guided by the same freedom, trust, and respect. Warm applause spread across the gardens. Even those who had once opposed the unusual bond between an alpha king and an ordinary omega now understood why the ancient stories had survived for generations. They had never been about destiny forcing two people together. They had always been about recognizing the rare courage required to choose love without surrendering dignity. As the celebration continued, the elderly archivist quietly closed the weathered journal she had carried for decades. Beneath the final illustration, one faded sentence caught the afternoon sunlight. It read that when a wolf recognizes a gentle soul, the kingdom itself begins to heal. She smiled, believing the old words had finally found their meaning. Nathaniel and Olivia walked together through the blooming gardens, while children ran laughing across the green lawns and families gathered beneath flowering trees. The palace that had once seemed impossibly large now felt like a home filled with warmth instead of loneliness. Nathaniel glanced toward Olivia. "Do you ever regret staying?" he asked softly. She smiled as a gentle breeze carried the fragrance of spring blossoms around them. "Not for a single moment," she answered. "You gave me the freedom to leave. That is why choosing to remain became the easiest decision I ever made." Nathaniel looked toward the bright horizon where the kingdom stretched far beyond the palace walls. The promise that had begun as a single night had become a lifetime built upon trust instead of fear, kindness instead of pride, and quiet choices instead of grand declarations. And from that day forward, whenever people spoke of the Alpha King and the gentle Omega who changed his heart, they remembered one simple truth above every ancient legend. True strength is always gentle, and the love that is freely chosen has the power to redeem not only two lives, but an entire kingdom. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite moment, and what message or lesson did you take away from Olivia and Nathaniel's journey? Share your opinion in the comments below and join the conversation with fellow story lovers. If you enjoyed this tale, please give the video a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Alpha's Regret Stories. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next exciting story filled with romance, drama, betrayal, and unforgettable twists. See you in the next story.